recording. Welcome the incredible Julie Bishop. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely delighted to be with you, Elizabeth. Missing you. Wish you were back in Australia.
Oh, I know. And now Melbourne is just...
Yeah, and in New South Wales, there's been an outbreak of cases, so we're worried that New South Wales might be facing another increase in infection rates. But I think the dramatic lockdown in Melbourne will eventually pay dividends. It's just that it's such a difficult time around the world, I must say. But of course, here in Australia, we were starting to think that we'd got on top of it. But of course, this virus will be with us until we find a vaccine or antiviral therapies. I think we're going to have to learn to live with COVID.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was so much looking forward to coming home for a little bit of respite, see the family, and now that's just been completely ruled out. So more of these talks.
I don't know when we will be able to travel again. I'm isolated here in what we're calling the People's Republic of Western Australia. No one's coming in, no one's going out. I haven't travelled since I came home via Dubai at the end of February. So this would be the longest that I've not been on a plane in living memory. And so it's quite unusual. It's a very different life that I'm leading at present.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as soon as I started doing these talks, and I've had so many fun guests on, and then of course you and I did the Lady Bunch together with Emma Hawkins and that crew, which was great fun. But I had so many messages, Julie, asking, please interview Julie, please interview Julie. We want you and Julie to do a one-on-one. And I have to say, in all the time that you and I have known each other, which it's been a few years now, I've never been out with anyone, certainly not in the political sphere, that has garnered such rock star status. And I say that with, I honestly mean that, because even when we've been out at, Sorrento Hotel, so shout out to Sorrento Hotel, but I've never known
You have to explain to some of your viewers the importance and the significance of the Sorrento Hotel on Portsea Polo weekend.
Well, it's one of the hardest places to get in Australia, I think, on that particular weekend. And luckily I've got some lovely connections there through my sister. So we've had our little booth there for a few years. But in terms of Australian politics, we come from a country of tall poppy syndrome, really, where the bigger you are, the more we want to cut you down and just don't get too big for your boots. But you have such love from everyone in our country, and so in particular from my generation and the younger generation who, really don't tend to get too involved in politics up until now. But you have the love of a nation, that is for sure.
Well, Elizabeth, that's so lovely that you say it. I wasn't a kind of a political warrior when I went into politics about 20 years ago. You know the story. I was a lawyer. I was working very hard to build a successful legal career. I thought about going into corporate life, and I went off to Harvard Business School. I took a sabbatical. And while I was away from everybody, friends, family, influences, I had a long, hard think about what I wanted to do in my life. And in one of the particular classes, one of the professors asked if any of us who were, clawing our way up to the corporate ladder would consider going into public office, public life. And it struck me at that moment, that's what I wanted to do.
Wow.
All my friends thought I was crazy. Why would you leave a successful private sector legal career to go into the chaotic world of, politics and public life, where at least half the population can't stand you because you're from the wrong side of politics, that sort of thing. But I was absolutely driven by my belief that I could make a difference. And I guess I was brought up to believe that entering public office was in fact one of the highest callings, and that if you had the opportunity to contribute to your community or your state or your country, then that was a contribution worth making. And so I tried to stay true to that. I tried to be authentic, tried to be myself, not who I thought others wanted me to be. And I didn't let others define who I should be or what my talents or abilities were. I just wanted to be myself. So I think the Australian people are pretty good at detecting authenticity
I
or
think so.
otherwise.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's almost a radar that's being developed, I think.
Thank goodness, because they get the opportunity to vote every 3 years. They can throw you out if they don't think you're the real deal. But
Yeah.
I had 20 wonderful years in politics. I loved it. I mean, you were part of I remember when we went campaigning in Melbourne that time.
I do. I was a young Liberal member from way back when, even prior to before I'd gone to live in LA. And then when I came back, and I definitely, you were certainly someone who inspired me to want to be back involved in politics. So, and that's how we met. And then obviously we've had a lot of great times thereafter, both obviously in Australia, but then, yeah, away overseas. And
Hey, hang on. What goes on tour stays on tour, Elizabeth.
absolutely. I'm a code of silence here.
No, only kidding. We really have had some fun times. And I think something that was so special to me was spending that time with you in RAK last year. I can't believe it was only last year, but that was special. I saw a side of the Emirates that I would never have experienced had it not been for you. So thank you. It was fabulous.
Of course. No, we had such a great time. And certainly, you know, I had to apologize for Australia, you know, that I threw you off the highest mountain peak in the Middle East, yourself and David going down the zip line.
People ask, you know, tell us some of the experiences you had as foreign minister. Well, I've got to add in taking part in the longest zip line in the world. Is it the longest or one of the longest?
No, it's the longest. It's the longest now. Yeah.
Now you tell me that. I remember. Do you remember where we were all standing up there ready to go, and nobody told me about keeping my head down? So we're heading off, and suddenly I look up and find myself spinning, and I thought, "Oh my God, this is going to be the end." So I'm,
I did.
Work out.
And I went down after yourself and David, and I didn't even know that. And I think
I saw David rocketing past, and his head was down, and I'm looking up, and that caught the wind, which spun me around. And then I kept my head down. We should stop talking about this because it sounds utterly terrifying. It was actually
it's amazing. It's amazing, but I do remember the drive up there, and we were like getting the higher, and we're like, oh, wowza! It's really
like this.
High up there.
This is quite serious, isn't it?
Yeah, but you know, it was wonderful to have you here to be able to meet His Highness as well, and who's such an incredible leader like yourself, and to have the banter between you two about, you know, British politics. I think it was at that time that it was.
I think it was British Soviet politics, where we had a very interesting discussion. Yes, that was a special moment, of course, going to the palace and meeting His Royal Highness, but also some of the other things we did. The day out on the Pearl boat when we were out pearling, that was so special. I had no idea that these experiences existed had it not been for you. So you're a special girl. Thank you.
My pleasure. Anytime. And tell me, you know, in terms of what you're doing now, I know you just had a talk with L'Oreal now, and I think you're with the guys from Sip Instant, who I actually interviewed one of their friends not long ago, Luke Zocchi. Obviously, I think you're with him today, but they're all the Hemsworth crew.
Well, this was a L'Oreal sustainability webinar where L'Oreal have embarked upon a new set of targets for being a world leader in sustainability. That is their environmental and social impact. And I'm really taken with what they are doing as such a large industrial conglomerate, for them to show leadership, not only in transforming their internal business practices, but also seeking to influence others in the supply chains, their customers, their clients, people with whom they do business, but also making a contribution to the global challenge of environmental sustainability, climate change and the like. So we had a great webinar today. I think they had over 1,000 people join in on it. And Craig Rucastle, you know, from The Chaser, he was the host. And Sip Instant guys were on there because of their sustainability practices in their coffee business. And I was talking about it from a former foreign minister's perspective, Australia's place in the world. So that's fun. Who would have thought that 6 months ago I'd be comfortable doing things online, video
Yeah.
conferencing, everything. It doesn't replace face-to-face meetings, and
No,
I'm
it
sure
doesn't.
when the travel restrictions are over, we will return to meetings face-to-face. There are nuances and protocols that you just can't replace. But I think we will do far more online. We've shown that we've got the capability, the flexibility, the adaptability. I just hope technology keeps up with the demand.
Yeah, absolutely. And the World Wide Web, just with, I think the demand on the system must be enormous. So
Right.
I guess we're doing okay at the moment, but we're wide open here. I mean, Dubai opened for tourists as of July 7th. Abu
Yeah.
Dhabi is a bit like Victoria at the moment, or WA. No one can come in or out unless you are tested for COVID, and within 72 hours you can jump in and out. But it's interesting to see, because the Middle East really shut down, Saudi and the UAE shut down so quickly,
Yes.
that it put us in a different, I guess, a different bracket for where we sit now, as opposed to sort of where Victoria or Melbourne are sitting. But from your standpoint, as a former foreign minister, how would have you have handled what's going on now? I mean, the pressures, you had a lot of pressures in your terms, though, in saying that. You had
I
Catherine.
certainly don't. Yeah, I don't envy world leaders at present. This is unprecedented.
Yeah,
And even though we being governments around the world, had been preparing for a global pandemic, when it actually hit, even though there'd been decades of planning and discussions and, what would we do? In
yeah,
fact, when the global pandemic hit, or the realization that we were in the midst of a global pandemic hit, there was no global framework. There were no playbooks to follow. And so each nation had to fall back on their own resources to work out how they were going to cope, what they would do.
yeah,
And we learned from other countries, but then we would have to test it out to see, will that work in Australia if we
yeah,
impose these restrictions, social distancing, the hygiene factors and the like. So I think that has been an example of how global leadership, or lack thereof, has had such an impact. Australia has done exceedingly well, and you say, what would you have done differently? Well, it's hard to reimagine what could have happened in
yeah, absolutely not.
years ago, but I think that our federal ministers, the Prime Minister, our state ministers have done an extraordinary job in the circumstances. There's been a bit of competition between our states, but that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. What works in one state is not necessarily going to work in another. But I
Yeah,
think they've done the best job they can, given that this is unprecedented, and no one country has all the answers. There is no, one silver bullet that's going to fix this. I
yeah,
think that something like, 270 active applications underway to develop a vaccine.
yeah,
But we don't have a flu vaccine. We don't have a vaccine for any
yeah.
COVID-related virus, at present. So I don't think we can bank on there being a vaccine. I think we just have to learn to live with it,
Live with it. Yeah,
and that's going to be challenging. But nevertheless, I think governments have done a pretty good job. I hope that there are real lessons learned from this. You see that there's the European Union, backed by Australia and others, have commenced this investigation into COVID-19. It's headed up by Helen Clark, the
yeah,
former Prime Minister of New Zealand. And I sent her a little text saying, all the best. And she
yeah,
knows it's a really tough job. But nevertheless, we have to look at what happened, what we would do differently, because there are a couple of things we do know. This pandemic will come to an end either by a virus or us learning to live with it. But there will be another. There will be another. So we have to learn from the lessons of this particular
yeah.
global pandemic.
Such a daunting prospect to think that there will be another, and will it be a back-to-back situation, or where do we, and especially in terms of just global economics, because I know here, obviously, one of the major revenues is been Emirates and Etihad, being two of the best airlines in the world, and they've taken a hit. They've taken a massive hit, just like every other airline in the world. It's not an isolated event to the Middle East, but just to see how different countries are adapting and recovering is something to behold, honestly.
Well, you'll appreciate that Qantas being, our major carrier has taken a huge hit. Virgin has struggled through, although there's now a new investor in Virgin, so we'll see how it turns out. But it's hard to imagine what it's going to look like. I just am trying to envisage getting on a plane and, traveling overseas.
Yeah.
It's now, 5-6 months since I've...
It feels worlds away. But
Yeah, doesn't it?
something else you and I have in common is a great love of fashion.
That's very true.
We've had some good times at Dubai Mall together, that's for sure. But when you look at, in particular, the retail sector, is that's the other sector that's taken a huge hit. I know that there are great Australian brands that have gone, not necessarily into liquidation, but into receivership, which is heartbreaking because Australia has such a wealth of beautiful fashion and beautiful designers, beautiful textiles to give to the world. And I just hope and pray that it rides the wave through, because it's something that I'm proud of as an Aussie. I wear a lot of Australian brands over here, and I see a lot of Australian brands over here. And you have been one of our greatest fashion ambassadors and icons. So how do you sit with what's going on here?
Well, I think that COVID will impact in various ways. Obviously, because we haven't been able to move around as we did, retail is taking a big hit. But some, like in Perth, when the restrictions were lifted, people went back to shopping at the same levels as before. I also think some brands were very quick to adapt, to pivot to online. And I've been speaking to friends in the in the fashion industry here in Perth, and they've been selling interstate and even overseas, because people are sourcing, they want a particular bag or they want a particular outfit. They will source wherever it is in the world. In fact, I was talking to at a function on Sunday, one of the an owner of a significant menswear store here in Perth, and he was saying that he's had inquiries for a Zegna jacket that he's got here in Perth from Milan. They wanted the jacket, they couldn't get it in Milan, so they go online, look for it, and found it in this store in Perth, Parker's in Perth, and so it was sent to Milan. So I think globalisation is still with us, but it's different.
And one of our common friends in Tamara, Ralph, I was having a chat. Obviously, Michael's still in Dubai, but Tamara, I had a chat to her.
Ralph and Russo,
Ralph and Russo, exactly. And they just had their very first online couture launch, which was the digital, in this digital age that they were in, Milan, and they were in Jordan, and that was extraordinary to see. But I think that demand, they've kind of changed it up a little, that their new collection has a lot of loungewear in it, which they had not previously done.
That was another point I was going to make. I also think that because we're all working from home, staying at home, everybody's much more informal, much more relaxed. And I think that is showing in our fashion tastes and the demand for more stay-at-home type gear, I think. And Australian fashion designers are renowned for their informality, their beautiful, casual, informal wear. And also we're leaders, as you know, in the whole sustainable fashion industry. When I was doing the L'Oreal event today, and yesterday I was doing some media around it, I was wearing some Kit X gear, Kit Willow's sustainable clothing, where she uses hemp, which is such a beautiful fabric and so eco-friendly, because hemp doesn't require the pesticides and herbicides, and doesn't require the same amount of water, and has a much higher yield per acre. And the root system of a cannabis plant, who knew? I don't know that much about cannabis plants, believe me, but the root system of cannabis plants actually holds the soil structure together and stops, runoff and topsoil blowing away. So people are being really creative in adapting to much more sustainable forms of clothing, and Australian designers are at the forefront of that. Kit Willow is one of them.
And I know Australian wine the stock has gone up. Obviously, a lot of people are staying at home, and obviously there's a great wine region in WA. But it's
Margaret River. I was down there the other weekend. A girlfriend and I went on a road trip down to Margaret River. It was so much fun. And it was the beginning of the school holidays, a lot of people down there,
Yeah.
and it made it feel as if COVID was a whole world away, which it kind of literally is.
Yeah.
But our wine regions, again, are adapting to ensuring that they can sell online and continue to export around the world. Because as you know, Australia is an export-oriented market economy. Our standard of living, our economic growth depends upon our ability to sell our high-quality goods and services around the world.
Yeah.
And
certainly here for food, food security is a big one here. And I know that the Australian beef market, there's a lot of demand here for it. In fact, if you go to the supermarkets, just being that it's COVID, the price of beef has just escalated here within our region, because we either get beef from South Africa or Australia. And so I've been certainly looking into export of beef in Australia over to the Middle East at the moment. Is something that needs to be a little bit more addressed. And I think that now that, I guess, with the trade between China and here isn't quite as, China and Australia, I mean, isn't quite as it was.
I think also that diversification of supply chains and diversification of export destinations has really been highlighted as essential during this time. And, you know, while, as you know, Australia has been pursuing and negotiating free trade agreements with countries around the world,
Yes.
we had China as our number one trading partner. If there are issues with your trading partner, then you really do need backup destinations. And I think that the Australian government has done a good job in looking for markets, and not only the government, obviously, but the private sector has done a great job in looking for markets around the world. And the diversification of supply chains has been so important. You know, when all of the PPE equipment, or the personal protection equipment comes from one source, well, that makes you vulnerable. So absolutely. I think that there'll be a rethinking of the way we used to do business. The new normal will be fascinating to behold.
Yes, and obviously now you also have Julie Bishop and Partners Advisory, and your company now. What does the future look like, albeit with COVID, but what does the future look like for you? What are your aspirations? What gives you joy at the moment?
I'm doing a number of things that are very exciting. My post-political career has worked out pretty well. I'm very, very happy. It's divided into several parts, but I'm doing what I want to do when I want to do it, and pursuing matters that are of great interest to me, or things that I feel really passionate about. And I'm Chancellor of the Australian National University. That's like, Chairman of the Board of the Australian National University.
Incredible.
And I would have been travelling back and forth to Canberra, but now I do everything on Zoom calls. And that's immensely satisfying, but immensely challenging, because of course we can't get international students into Australia, and there are all sorts of issues about our students having to, and our school students wanting to get into university next year because of disruption to their schooling. So ANU is a great passion. It's Australia's only national university, the only university set up under federal legislation, and it was set up after World War II to be a research-oriented higher education institution. So it's had its fair share of Nobel laureates, and our Vice Chancellor, currently Brian Schmidt, is a Nobel Prize winner. So it's a pretty impressive institution, and I'm delighted to be associated with it. I'm also on the International Advisory Board of a number of boards that operate globally, and that's fascinating. Again, doing everything online, although, when there's a board meeting at 9 o'clock in New York, that tends to be, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock here, so it's a bit tricky. And I'm also doing a lot of not-for-profit work. I'm the chairman of Telethon Kids Institute, which is a paediatric health and medical research institute here in Western Australia. They're doing some amazing things. Through that, I'm a board member of the International Human Vaccine Project, and that was set up before COVID. And the idea is to use big data and health and medical research to come up with, one size lifetime vaccines for particular diseases and conditions. And then I've got my strategic advisory firm, Julie Bishop and Partners, JBP, and we have a number of clients to whom we advise and provide advice. And then I was doing a lot of public speaking engagements, like. But of course, that's all finished as a result of COVID. Nobody's having gatherings of 1,000 people in conference centres anymore. So
Yeah.
that came from about March, but I'm sure that'll pick up again. So life is very busy, fascinating. It did involve a great deal of travel, which has all just come to a shuddering halt. So I've now fallen in love with my city of Perth once more, spending so much time here.
Yeah, and that's that glass half full, right? You know, as opposed to that glass. Yeah, I think that you just have such an ability to touch people, and you always are making a difference in whatever it is that you do. And we are so lucky as Australians to have you as one of our leaders, or who has been one of our leaders. And I so look forward to everything that you do. And particularly our friendship has just been such a joy, and you brought so much to my life, which is great laughs and so much experience, that you've been a wealth of knowledge to share with me, and I can't thank you enough for that.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. That's such a beautiful thing for you to say. I'm glad we keep in touch, and you know, I get crazy messages from you saying something that makes me laugh. And you know, how important is that? You want to be around people that do make you feel good. You want to have a laugh with people. You know, if they haven't got the same sense of humour as you, it can be rather awkward, can't it? But we have had fun.
The laughs that we had
here. Circumstance. Yeah. It's
just
important.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I won't keep you too much longer. I know. What time is it?
I'm going out for a run right now. I haven't got my 20,000 steps up for the day. So
don't go me like that, Julie. I tried to go for a run the other day, and I didn't send you a message. It was 44 degrees. Hot.
I know. No, I forgive you. Why don't you go into a quiet yoga studio, air conditioned, and do a little bit of Zen time?
I'm not into yoga. I would love to be more Zen, but I'm terrible. I'm terrible at it. I need more, I'd rather put on some music and have a dance than I would. Whenever I try and do yoga and they're like, be quiet, don't think, I'm like, okay, don't think. That's me. So
meanwhile, your brain's going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I know.
Yeah, pretty much.
Anyway, lovely to speak to you, and take care. Stay safe.
Well, you too. Wow, sending you lots of love. I'm going to hit non-record.
I hit leave, I think. Bye.
Bye. Mwah.